Hello, everyone. We're getting a little bit of an early start today. We have a large program. We want to make sure we have time for everything. So welcome to the Bloomington Rotary Club's weekly celebration of service for July 26th, 2022. I'm Ashley Wesley, your past president, and I'm thrilled to be leading the meeting. Alon is out of town, and I'm sure he'll take up the helm in 2 weeks. Next week, Ron Barnes, our president-elect, will be leading our meeting. So you get a back-to-back president, past president celebration. You can be seated. Thank you for rising. And I would like to invite Connie Chikalis up to offer our reflection.
Thank you, past President Ashley. Who chooses our speakers? Does everyone agree? If you agree, raise your hand. If you do not agree, raise your hand. Okay, because I've been talking to some Rotarians this year, and what I found was that a lot of you think that the president chooses the speakers. The president doesn't choose the speakers. A program committee of about 12 or 14 of us do. So this year, Alan is adjusting the duties of the program committee, and we want you to know what's going on. This year, our theme is Imagine Rotary, which you know, and a big goal for our club includes diversity and inclusion, plus attracting Bloomington's thought leaders to us. In the past, individual program members have chosen speakers she or he wanted to hear. This is the big change. By the way, this is how speakers do get chosen. The program committee chooses chooses the speaker. So don't blame any presidents, past or present, if your choice didn't come through. If you do not like a particular speaker, then by all means do blame Alan. So this year, any club member can suggest a potential speaker to the committee. We will put your name on a list for program members to consider. We're trying not just to attract diverse personalities and populations and community leaders, but also to try to ensure that the speaker's topic is in line with our goals and that she or he is an effective presenter. Rashad, don't be nervous. It's a lot to ask, we know. Programmers, if you are here, please raise your hand. So I'm going to read the list of names just so you'll know who we are. Connie and Michael are the co-chairs this year. Last year, we flipped. Michael was in the front and I was in the back training. This year, I'm in the front and Michael is in the back supporting. So again, if you don't like any of our choices, do blame Michael. Ruth Boschkoff, Bill Brown, Teresa Clare, Sally Gaska, Leslie Green, Rex Hillary, Owen Johnson, Jeff McKim, Judy Schroeder, Lynn Schwartzberger, Jim Shea, and Charlotte Zitlow. Do I have any questions or comments? Oh, sorry. Any questions or comments? Oh, good. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Connie. We always have such wonderful speakers, so I'm sure that will remain the same. Now I would like to introduce our guests. We have Jessica Davis joining us, a guest of Michael Shermis from the MLK Commission. If you would stand so we could recognize you. Welcome. Elizabeth Mitchell, a guest of Jim Bright from Resilience Productions. Latoya Moss, a guest of Isidore Torrey from the City of Bloomington. Charlie Nelms and Janetta Nelms, parents of our speaker, are joining us today. Please stand so we can recognize you. Tamara Lowenthal and Jill Campbell from Lotus have joined us today. And did I miss anyone that didn't get signed in? Oh, Gladys Devane. She was first on my list too. Gladys, please stand so you can be recognized. That's okay, I've got you. Gladys is our 2022 Rotary Toast honoree. So thank you so much for joining us today. All right. And Joy, do we have guests on Zoom?
Why, yes, we do, Ashley. I'm pleased to welcome back to Rotary Stephanie von Hirschberg, who was a speaker to our club in November, I think, last year. So welcome, Stephanie. Glad to have you. Always glad to have Ann Bright joining us. Ann, thank you for being here today. And then we have a few Rotarians. I'm keeping my eye out. I don't think they've entered the room yet, but I want to welcome David Willett from the Plymouth, Michigan Rotary Club. And then, of course, always a warm welcome to past District Governor Sue Wright with the Clark County Rotary. And as I look, let's see, did I miss anybody? I hope I didn't, but if I did, we were expecting Don Harvey with the Columbus Sunrise Club and John Thon, whom I'm sorry if I messed up that name, from the Southport Rotary Club. Welcome to all our guests. Thank you.
And if you're interested in learning more about Rotary, please talk to anyone at your table. We'd love to share with you. Now I'd like to welcome Tamara Lowenthal and Jill Campbell up to give us a presentation about Lotus.
So first of all, we want to thank Rotary. Many of you know that we received a grant. It was a reimbursement grant for our Lotus Blossoms programming this spring. So it was in April of 2022. And Blossoms as a program is a really wonderful way for us to do outreach in the community. So part of our mission for Blossoms is to bring artists to places where people are. That includes schools, retirement communities, service clubs in Bloomington and surrounding counties. So that's the general mission of what we're doing with Blossoms, but specifically Rotary this year helped us plan and pay for materials and implement the Bazaar. And Jill's going to tell you a little bit about the Bazaar.
Okay, so it's the Lotus Blossoms World Bazaar. It happens every year at Fairview Elementary School. It's a 2-day event. The Friday is open to MCCSC 4th grade schools, and then we open it to the broader community on Saturday. And how we organize it is that Lotus partners with a lot of community organizations, local artists, a lot of departments and programs through Indiana University to have several different, it's like a mini festival. So if you've ever been to like a bazaar, you know, there's booths and things for people to do activities. We hosted a printmaking activity at the Lotus booth. People had the ability to explore different languages, like African languages, you know, learn how to write your name in Korean, stuff like that. It just gives kids like a cool kind of world perspective on things that they might not have experienced yet, being 4th graders, you know. So this year, unfortunately, due to COVID, we were only able to invite 4th graders from Title I schools. And if you're not familiar with what a Title I school is, there's schools that receive funding from the government where more than 50% of students attending that school are on free or reduced lunch. So these schools sometimes don't have, oops, sorry. Somebody's saying it was a fun day last year. That's nice. So what Rotary really helped us with this is to reach the students for the Bazaar that weren't able to attend. So there are 7 Title I schools in MCCSC. So we were still able to have hundreds of 4th graders come and attend this event, but there were still almost 500 that weren't able to come. So we created packets of materials so those students could, with their art teacher or a music teacher, explore within their own schools and their safe spaces to like have these activities to like learn about other countries and their customs and their arts practices, along with the students who could actually attend in person. And Rotary also helped us with printing those materials and printing advertisements for the community day in case those children's like families felt safe enough to take them in person on community day. So that was really helpful. For the actual in-person bazaar, Rotary's funds really helped us bus the students in. I think in the past, we've kind of left that up to the schools to pay for, or we've helped them in some way. But this year, since we were able to provide the funds for that with the help of Rotary, schools were psyched about that. They were like, oh, we don't have to pay for that. We don't have to organize it. That's so great. So that really helped out too. It's a really, Blossoms and Bazaar is the most mission-based event that we do at Lotus. And it was just really nice to get you guys help to make this possible for area fourth graders and the broader community. So
I was just going to add also, you may know, because you may be among them, the volunteers from Rotary. So we had volunteers at the bazaar helping out, and they were Rotarians. So that was also really wonderful because that gave Rotarians the chance to experience the bazaar for themselves from the service point of view. And I also want to especially thank Sally Gaskell, who helped write the grant that got us this money, and also Vaughn Welsh, who helped steward it all the way through.
Helped with the not fun part, which is the reporting at the end. But but he was great to work with. So yes, thank you guys very much for your help with funding the Blossoms World Bazaar this year.
And you can still go online and see the after effects, see photos and see some of the engagement that we did if you're interested. So
yeah, cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Just a show of hands, who volunteered for that event? Awesome. Thank you so much for being there. All right. I would like to welcome Sarah Laughlin up to give us a brief announcement about Teachers Warehouse Supply Drive.
Very brief. The Teachers Warehouse Supply Drive is this Saturday. The supply drive typically yields about enough supplies to meet our teachers' most pressing needs for the first semester of school. So it's really important to us. And we have 5 locations this year. We still need, when I came to the door, we needed 5 volunteers. Now we still need 4 more volunteers. So if you are interested in helping on Saturday from 12 to 2 or from 2 to 4 at Kroger's North, please see me today, and I'll make sure you get signed up on Sign Up Genius so you'll get the reminder. Thank you.
All right. It's really fun. You should do it. I have a blast, and everybody's very generous, and they just have cartloads and cartloads of crayons and paper, and it makes a huge difference for our area teachers. All right, Jim Bright, please come forward and give us an update on the Rotary Toast.
Thank you, Past President Ashley. And as Ashley mentioned, we have with us today, not just special guests, but we've got a special guest. And I'm talking about our honoree for the 8th annual Rotary Toast, Gladys Devane. Gladys. And Gladys, it's absolutely great to have you with us here. Earlier this year, a committee representing the 3 Bloomington Rotary clubs came together and selected Gladys as our honoree. And now I want to invite all of you to join us at Ivy Tech Shreve Hall Friday, November 4th for a night of celebration and inspiration. 2-time Grammy Award-winning soprano Sylvia McNair has agreed to be the MC that evening. How special is that? We'll also have as toasters Gladys's brother, Leonardo Butch Neese of Oklahoma, who I understand is quite a comic. And we've also got Danielle Bruce, Rita Naramore, Marilyn Schultz, and of course our own Charlotte Zitlaw, who is our 7th annual Toast honoree. So it's definitely destined to be a night to remember. It's definitely destined to be a sellout. So don't delay. You want to go online and secure your seats. Now, over the past 7 years, the Bloomington Rotary Toast has raised more than $275,000 for area charities ranging from Boys and Girls Clubs, Friends of the Library, YMCA, Stone Belt, Hoosier Hills Food Bank. And the other half goes to fund projects for the three clubs. And the program that Tamara and Jill mentioned, Lotus, was funded in part by last year's Toast. So this year, Gladys has chosen Life Designs as her charity, which partners with people with disabilities to promote their independence. So for tickets and sponsorship information, very easy to remember, just go to rotarytoast.com. That's rotarytoast.com. And if you forget it, it'll be in the roundabout. So back to you, past President Ashley. And great to have you with us, Gladys.
I think that needs a round of applause. Okay, Sally Gaskell. A quick announcement about the Rotary Book Club.
So I am very pleased to announce, I think this is a big secret, except to everyone who's a member of the Rotary Book Club and attended our last convening. I'm happy to announce the selection for our next book. The book club meeting will take place the second Wednesday of October at 7 p.m. Everyone's invited, either on Zoom or in person at Judy Schroeder's house. The book is Come Sit With Me, Life in Poetry, Prose, and Plays by Gladys Devane, illustrated by Danielle Bruce. Wow, we really got it together this year, and we are co-promoting the Rotary Toast recipient with the reading of her book, her memoir from last year. Can't wait.
Okay, a few acknowledgements. Producer Michael Sherman's keeping us all together back there. Round of applause for him. Our Zoom host, Joy Harder, thank you so much. Sarah Laughlin was our greeter today, and our roundabout reporter for the month is Glenda Murray. We have two birthdays. Dick McKay was yesterday, and Scott Walters is today. Happy birthday. And membership anniversaries, Connie Shikalis has been with us for 2 years. Is that really all? Wow. Feels longer than that in a good way, I promise. All right. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Yolanda Trevino to come up to introduce our speaker.
Thank you. So it is my pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Rashad Nelms, to share his experiences with the United Nations World Food Program, as well as his insights and reflections on the issue of international food security. Rashad was born in Gary, Indiana, and grew up throughout the Midwest, including Dayton, Ohio, Richmond, Indiana, and Flint, Michigan. He attended the University of Michigan and graduated with honors with a degree in political science. And then he attended the University of Michigan's Law School, where he graduated with his JD degree. After law school, Rashad joined the World Food Program and worked in their headquarters in Rome, Italy, as a policy officer. Since then, Rashad has served in various positions and in different countries for nearly 18 years, helping the World Food Program provide food assistance to more than 80 million people every single year. Rashad is currently on sabbatical from the WFP, and we work together as members of the Indiana University's Office of the Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Multicultural Affairs. He joined our office last November, is that all? And serves as an executive in residence. I say is that all because he has really served IU on all of our campuses in such an amazing way. In his role, Rashad supports IU in 3 areas: diversifying the faculty and leadership appointments across the university, enhancing the knowledge and skills needed by undergraduate and graduate students to succeed in today's global workforce, and serving as an executive coach to mid-level and senior university administrators and the OVP DEMA management team. In addition to working in the arenas of international affairs and food security, as well as higher education, Rashad was formally trained, and you're going to see this, as a menswear tailor while living in Rome and speaks Italian fluently. As I say, here we go. We have another fluent Italian speaker here. So maybe he can design and make something for us as club members. I don't know, Rashad. So please join me in welcoming my friend and colleague and today's featured speaker, Mr. Rashad Nelms.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My father's here, and so if you know my father, he has a way of introducing meetings, and he wants people to be exuberant. So I'm going to ask again, good afternoon. Good afternoon. That's for my father here in the front row. For those who are online, I want to thank Yolanda for the wonderful introduction and for her support over the past 7 going on 8 months now, in which we worked together. I also want to express my thanks and appreciation to Michael, to Alan, to Ashley, for allowing me the opportunity to share with you my experiences working with the United Nations World Food Program. I'm going to be honest with you. I prepared a set of remarks and they were quite formal, and I was going to stick to that script, and there are elements of it that I will, but I want to share with you something a bit more personal, right? Because it's difficult to capture 18 years of experiences in 20 minutes. Very difficult. As Yolanda mentioned, I'm originally from Gary, Indiana, moved around a lot, and ended up attending the University of Michigan, graduated from there, and then pursued my JD, received that, and I knew I didn't want to practice law, right? You would think that after 3 years and an exorbitant amount of money that I would have chosen otherwise, but I didn't. I did want to use my degree to effectuate as much good as possible. And through a series of twists and turns and leveraging my network and those of others, I found my way to the United Nations World Food Program, where I worked with Indiana University graduate and former trustee, Jim Morse, who I'm sure many of you know. And Jim at that time was the executive director of the World Food Program. And so he took a chance on me. He invited me to serve as a policy officer for this organization for which I knew very little, but there was something about it that really stood out. Here's what makes WFP special. WFP was formed in 1961. And it was conceived with the idea of taking in-kind food, right? Corn, bags of corn, bottles of oil, bags of rice, putting them on ships and other vessels, transporting them to areas such as Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America, with the express purpose of feeding people. And so that worked. It worked for decades. However, when I joined, I had the opportunity to help the organization rethink how we were going to do this. And so we created what was then a pretty radical and revolutionary strategic plan. And what that strategic plan allowed us to do was to have a more diverse assortment of modalities in which we could help feed people. So let me give you a couple examples. The first one is cash and vouchers, right? So many of us are accustomed to going to Kroger's or the Fresh Time and taking out our debit card or our credit card and purchasing the food that we've put into our carts. However, if you're a Syrian refugee, right, up until maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago, if you were a Rohingya refugee who was escaping the massacre and the genocide in Myanmar, if you were a South Sudanese who was escaping civil war in South Sudan, you didn't have that. Most likely we were providing literally in-kind food. But we recognized that we could support both food security of those individuals as well as the economy by creating this debit card. And so we partnered with financial institutions such as MasterCard and Visa to create a debit card, right? And so a family of 5, let's say if you're a Syrian refugee who's living in Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, you will receive this debit card that's tied to the head of the household, and you will receive, let's say, $100 or $200. You'll then have the opportunity to go into a store in the refugee camp, purchase the commodities, and use them as you see fit, ensuring that you're able to consume the food in a way that is consistent with integrity as well as your cultural norms. That didn't exist before. The same is true of your Rohingya refugee. We literally created more than 21 stores, almost like a Kroger, a Walmart, in this camp where they have restricted movement. And we said, you have the opportunity to purchase the food and to consume it as you see fit on your terms. Again, it's about ensuring that people not only eat, but also have some dignity when consuming it. Another example is the African Risk Capacity Initiative. So in sub-Saharan Africa, it's very prone to floods and to droughts. And so what happens is that when those strike, many times governments will call upon the UN to assist. However, we recognized that there was a better way of doing it. And so what we said was, we're going to create an insurance policy where if a certain magnitude of drought or a flood is triggered, the governments will receive a payout. The governments can then decide, based on their own analysis and assessment of the situation, which institutions, be it the UN, NGOs, other government institutions, are best suited to support them. Another example of this new strategic plan were iris scans. So in the past, we would literally, and I'll never forget this, when I worked in South Sudan, we would collect beneficiary data on pieces of paper with a pen and pad, right? Now, it worked, it functioned, because in many of these places, electricity and telecommunications are virtually non-existent or sporadic at best. However, what we realized is that we needed to do this a better way. And so what we created was literally, and with the support of the tech community, iris scans. So we have a head of a household. That person is identified as the person who's going to receive food on behalf of that family. We do an iris scan, and so all their data is put into the system, so that when they come every 2 weeks or every 4 weeks to collect their benefits, we know that it's them. It reduces the probability of misappropriation and increases the probability that the food is being used by the right people. So I had this opportunity to do that. And then I had a chance to go to South Sudan. And in South Sudan, at that moment, it was going through a war for independence from the government of Sudan and Khartoum. And what I was asked to do was to help figure out how we could minimize the harm that we're putting our beneficiaries in. So I'll give an example. You have a distribution that's going to occur at 12 o'clock in the afternoon. Refugees or IDPs will go there. They receive the commodities, and then they travel, let's say, half a mile, 2 miles, 3 miles with a 50-pound bag, either in their hands or on top of their head. The Janjaweed, who were armed militia supported by the Sudanese government, will wait about a mile out. 12:15, 12:20, that's when they would start heading to the beneficiaries. And because we are the United Nations, we are not in a position where we can attack. We can only respond to attacks. So you were literally seeing beneficiaries being beaten and robbed of their food. And there was nothing we could do about it, or so we thought. So the work that I contributed to, the research that I produced, helped to identify ways in which we could reduce the probability of that occurring. So how do we do it? One way was to move the distribution sites closer to where people live, reduce the distance. Another one was to change the timing, keep the Janjaweed guessing as much as possible. Another strategy was to have someone accompany people on their journey from the site in which they received the food back to their home. So I did that. Then I came back and I was asked to go to Zambia. And again, I had never been to Southern Africa other than working in South Africa for a brief period of time. So Zambia was new to me. And I worked about 7 hours away from the capital of Lusaka in the eastern province in a small city called Chipata. And Chipata is, if you can imagine, it's this green, mountainous area, wonderful people, welcoming, hospitable, but they also suffered from a significant, what was then a pretty significant amount of malnutrition, undernutrition, and food insecurity. And so I led a team of around 10 people, all Zambians, in implementing this program that consisted of school feeding. So children will come to school, receive a meal. Part two of that was many of the children, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, have to work for their families. And so the families cannot afford for the children to be awake too long, because that's a loss of income, it's a loss of food. So what we created was a program in which students would come to school, receive a meal, but then also have a take-home ration that they could take back to the family. Another example of a program that we had was for people living with HIV and AIDS. So we may take it for granted here in the West, but far too frequently, what happens is that if you are suffering from HIV or AIDS, you're taking a medication to help minimize the levels of the disease, the virus. The challenge, though, is that that medicine makes you hungry. And so if you don't have access to food, the likelihood of you getting off of the medication skyrockets. And that's what was happening in parts of Zambia, including the Eastern Province where I was working. So we created a program where we provided training, so income generation training. So whether it's weaving baskets, whether it's making pottery, whatever the activity might be, paid individuals who are suffering from HIV/AIDS a small amount of money for that, with the intense purpose of them then purchasing the food or consuming the food that they desire. And then after 6 to 9 months, they would have the expertise in order to do this on their own. Pretty fascinating. Another example was food for work and food for assets. So what happens here is that if you see a school being built in the west side or the east side of Bloomington, 9 times out of 10, it was contracted by the state or by the city, and it's built. However, in parts where I'm working, really remote areas, that's a luxury that doesn't exist. So what we did was to identify who are the most food insecure people who have the skills and the expertise to construct roads, to build houses, to build schools. And we provided them with food. And then once that project was completed, we have a physical infrastructure that can be used by the community. Again, things that we don't necessarily have to think about in the West. As an aside, here's the challenge though. WFP has an operational budget of around $9.6 billion as of 2021. We have nearly 20,800 employees worldwide. 87% of them work in the field, such as the remote parts of Zambia and Tanzania and whatnot. We feed, as of 2021, around 120 or 110 million people. Now remember, I said that operational budget was 9.6 billion. That still was not enough. We were short 5.2 billion. Right? 5.2 billion. And so what happens is that if you're a director of an office, such as the one where I was, or the country office in Lusaka that's responsible, for all of the offices throughout the country, if you don't have enough money coming in, let's say your program is 4 years, valued at $100 million, and you don't have enough money, you have to make some tough choices. So remember, I just listed some of the activities. Which program do you cut if you only have 10% of your funding? How do you go about making that decision? Do you cut off the children? Do you cut off the people living with HIV/AIDS? Do you cut off the people who are creating these community structures? What about if you're a Syrian refugee or a Rohingya refugee, and this is your only source of food? Do you cut them? Do you reduce the rations? How do you figure this out? These are the real practical and pragmatic challenges that my colleagues face every single day due to a lack of consistent funding. I've had to have that conversation with a refugee who was living in Zambia despite a war, despite the end of a war in Mozambique in the early 1990s. How do you tell that person, I'm cutting you off? And that you have no other alternative, that you flip the mattress upside down, there's no money. How do you have that conversation? We do that every single day. Every day. So I left Zambia, came back to Rome and helped to mobilize funds from governments such as the United States, Israel, Pakistan, and others, with the express purpose of supporting our program. And so that led me to Islamabad, Pakistan. And I was in Islamabad because there was a major flood there. And so the UN needed to procure resources or to receive resources to facilitate this response. So I lived in a guest house. And the anecdote that I want to share is that I'm Christian by choice. And I'm living in this guest house. And the guys there are practicing Muslims. And it's the night before Ramadan. And they come to my room at around 10 o'clock, knock on the door. Mr. Rashad, yeah, how are you doing? I said, I'm doing well. I said, what time do you want breakfast tomorrow? I said, well, 7 o'clock because the buses kept picking me up at 8. Yeah, but Mr. Rashad, it's sunup by then. And so I had a choice because my full name is Rashad Zaki Nelms. And so for many people who practice Islam, Rashad Zaki is recognized as being Arabic or a Muslim name. So they saw me as Muslim. And so I had to make a decision on the fly. Do I tell them that I'm Christian and potentially ruin or irrevocably hurt the relationship, or do I go along with it? I went along with it. So for 23 days, I practiced Ramadan. I woke up at 1 o'clock in the morning, consumed my meal, went back to bed around 3, woke up at 7, went to work, and engaged in iftar at sundown. And that was one of the most life-changing experiences I've ever had. All because I happened to be in Islamabad, Pakistan. And so I could tell more and more of these stories and these anecdotes, but the point is that WFP provides you with a unique set of perspectives and experiences that I would argue you can't receive anyplace else. No place else. And the great thing about it is that you can also do good at the same time. So from Islamabad, came back to Rome, and then I went to New York, where I engaged in advocacy and fundraising for the UN in New York. Came back and worked as a special assistant to our former executive director, Earthring Cousin, who was appointed by President Obama. And so every executive director is appointed by the US president, essentially. So Jim was appointed by President Bush. His successor was appointed by President Bush. And then Earthring was appointed by President Obama. And so I had the opportunity to travel the world, to go to refugee camps in IDP camps in South Sudan, to work closely with the government of India to figure out how do they increase their food security by simply reducing the amount of food loss. How do they do that? I had the opportunity to go to Australia and work with the government to figure out how we can increase the amount of multilateral funding that we receive for WFP. And there's a key distinction there. Multilateral means that we can use it any way that we want. Whereas directed aid, which many governments give to WFP, they say we wanted to go to this program in this country for this period of time. Now, again, going back to that Zambia analogy, if you have a $100 million program over 4 years, and the government donors are telling you where the money goes, that's tough. Because what happens then if you recognize there's a gap in another program, but the US government or the Netherlands government or the Japanese government says you can't use it? And that's what happens. They will say you can't use it because it's not aligned with their political as well as their humanitarian and foreign policies. What do you do then? Again, these are examples, real life examples of what my colleagues face every single day. And so traveled, served as special assistant, also had the opportunity to manage celebrities such as Michael Kors, Drew Barrymore, Christina Aguilera, and others in support of our advocacy and fundraising campaigns. I also had the opportunity to travel to West Africa during the Ebola crisis. And you want to say scared? That was probably the moment, a real live moment that I thought was going to die. Really thought that I would not come back. We literally landed in Sierra Leone, get into a truck, takes us to our hotel. Before you can get out, window rolls down. They put a temperature gun to your face, to your forehead, take your temperature. If it checks out, you're able to get out of the truck. You have a bowl of water there with bleach. You wash your hands in bleach. Tap each other on the elbows, go inside your hotel, go to your meetings, and this process repeats itself, right? And then on top of that, we're asking our employees, our personnel, to deliver food at the height of this Ebola crisis. So literally, I'm going into hospitals, I'm going into coroner's offices. On one hand, wanting to prevent malnutrition and food insecurity, but also worried about my own well-being. These are the challenges that my colleagues face every single day. And so I think I'm running out of time. And so I would love to have told you much more, but I think that it's important for you to see what is really going on when we talk about international food security and the challenges, the real day-to-day operational challenges that we face. And so if there's an opportunity in the future to go into more detail with the Rotary Club, I would welcome that. In the meantime, I'm going to close and offer the floor to questions. Thank you.
We have a question from on Zoom. It says, if Ukraine is not able to export its grain, how will this impact UN food programs? What countries provide the most financial support? And is U.S. support declining or increasing?
So what's happened is since the war started in Ukraine, our operational costs have gone up around 40 million per month, right? Representing an 87% increase since 2019. 40 million, right? So the cost of sourcing food is just skyrocketing, which also impacts logistics. So we have to pay more for logistics, right? So it has these knock-on effects. I think that if the situation isn't resolved, and this is just my personal belief, then you're going to continue to see the UN struggling with how do we get more food to people as quickly as possible. That's number one. Number two, you're probably going to see an increased amount of assistance that the organization, WFP and other UN agencies are providing to refugee host countries. So Poland, Germany, and others, because they can't do it by themselves. And we have the technical know-how and experience. So I think you're gonna see that. The biggest donor to the WFP, I think was the question, is the US by far. They come in at around 1/3 every single year, if not more, right? And then it's important to note that WFP is probably 96 to 97% funded by governments and 3 to 4% funded by private sector, which is in complete opposite complete opposite to UNICEF. And then similarly, we don't have an assessed fund. So that means that every time that the year starts anew, January 1st, we essentially go back to zero. And so that's why we're constantly fundraising, because there's only so much money that you can carry over. Because again, the government says, we're giving you money. We want it to be used within a 12-month period. The challenge is that if that money comes in late, that impacts how quickly we can procure food, the availability of logistics. Then we have to worry about if it's rainy season, whether there's a drought, which impedes our ability to get the food where we need to get it. So then we have to go back to donors and ask for an extension. Some donors are more amenable than others.
I congratulate you on all the work that you're personally doing and the work that the organization has done to end hunger throughout the world. It's very, very impressive.
Thank you.
To what extent are you going into villages and affected areas to help them be self-sustaining with wells, with raising chickens, with selling eggs from those chickens, that type of thing, so that the need for you to be there is reduced?
So we have initiatives such as something that we created with the Gates Foundation, as well as the Howard Buffett Foundation, called Purchase for Progress, P4P. And so that's an initiative where we work with, or we partner with smallholder farmers, particularly women in sub-Saharan Africa, provide them with the training, provide them with inputs, and with the express purpose of them producing, whether it's corn, whether it's oil or whatever it is, that we then purchase and use for our activities. That's one example. Part two of that, though, is that the goal is that they're connected to the market, so that if and when we reduce our amount of consumption, or the amount of commodities that we purchase, they will have understanding of how the market works, how to get there, and how to leverage to their benefit. So that's one example. Another example is what we do in the refugee camps. When I was in Cox's Bazaar, Bangladesh, we literally work with local farmers, and they would produce hot chili peppers, fish, and other things that we then sell in the market or sell in the refugee camp, right? And that's where that debit card comes in. The challenge is that we're seen as an emergency relief organization. And so donors don't necessarily want us to engage in what we would call development. And so it's this chicken egg kind of conundrum. We're working in remote areas, whereas other institutions are not. So it's this constant kind of cycle that pervades.
This has been an absolutely wonderful presentation. And I know your father, and I know he grew up in the Mississippi Delta area of Arkansas, and he lived in various places in this country. What do you think the United States of America is doing in dealing with its hungry and underserved and poverty-stricken areas?
Well, Tim, thank you for your question. I think that the government can do more, but I think we also need to recognize that we have a strong safety net that includes welfare, that includes SNAP, excuse me, right? And other things. Now, can we do more? Can the government do more? I would argue yes. The challenge is, just like with the UN, where do you get that money? And part two of it is governments typically don't respond to situations unless they're urgent or emergency. And that's just the luck of the draw, unfortunately. So I'm not sure to answer your question, Tim, fully, but that's what I got.
Thank you.
Thank you. For one thing, I think it's been magnificent in your different responses to the different challenges. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I have a question. Does corruption play a role in all this?
It does. It does. I think it's also important to note, though, that A, corruption takes place all across the world. B, that it intersects with other issues. So for instance, we talk about, there might be people, I've heard statements like, why can't Africa get its act together? Why can't country X get its act together? Well, part of the problem is that the odds are stacked against them. There's something called the Doha rounds, right? That used to take place on an annual basis. And those were so important because they brought together different governments, right? And they would talk about some of the most pressing or fundamental economic issues, one of which was trade. So what happens in the US is that we give our farmers a subsidy, just like Canada, just like Japan, just like Russia. Now, sub-Saharan African farmers can produce as much as they want and even and sell it at a cheaper price, but they're not going to be able to compete, at least in my mind, based on this subsidy. They just can't, right? So that's part of the problem. Another part of the problem is just a lack of infrastructure, right? Another piece of it is corruption. And then another piece is geopolitical priorities, right? There's a reason why, and again, without going into too much detail, why certain governments prioritize Ethiopia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, South Sudan, now Ukraine. And there's a reason why others support Nicaragua, Ghana, Senegal, South Africa, Sudan. I'm pretty sure you can read between the lines there. But there's a reason why. It's because it's geopolitical. People don't know about that.
We have one more from online.
Okay.
Dick Sims. He says, hi to Brother Nelms. With the U.S. having vastly more resources than most globally, has the U.S. considered using some of the UN's models or other models to combat food insecurities in this country? Do you have any ideas for increased efficiencies in how we assess the food insecure here in the US?
The reason why I'm kind of smiling to myself is that I'm going to say this in a personal capacity. I think it's unlikely, whether it's the US or any other advanced government, that they're going to rely on or ask for assistance from the UN. It's not a good look publicly. In terms of what the US can do, what was the second part of the question? Sorry, Michael.
Do you have any ideas for increased efficiencies in how we assist the food insecure here in the US?
I think a big piece is leveraging behavior science, behavior economics, and neuroscience principles. One of the things I talk about with clients frequently is that individuals, humans, are not rational. They don't respond to more data. Everyone in this room who drives, if you were to show your hands, and I'm not asking if you do it, I'm pretty sure nearly every one of us in this room, as well as those online, will raise their hands if I were to ask you, have you ever texted while driving? Have you? No. Okay. We have one. Okay. Okay. Or have you ever rolled a stop sign? Have you ever sped? The data tells you don't do that because it's going to result in potential death or injury to you or to someone else, but we still do it. So why should we believe that that kind of approach will work when it comes to getting people to eat more nutritionally or to provide greater access to nutritious food within the US? So it's going to require us, I think, to leverage more of the tactics and strategies that Apple, Google, the US military use in order to compel or to encourage behavior change. So thank you again. Ashley, appreciate it.
You have a few moments to stay after if there's an additional question. Okay. I saw some hands raised on Zoom, so I wanted to make sure we could get to you. In honor of your presentation, we will be making a contribution to New Hope for Families. It's founded in 2011. New Hope is an emergency housing solution in Monroe County that helps families stay together, including families with adults and children of all ages and any composition. Next week's meeting will be right here in the Georgian Room on Zoom, and our speaker will be Christian Freitag, Clinical Associate Professor of Law and Executive Director of the Conservation Law Center. Until recently, he served as Executive Director of Sycamore Land Trust. And now we'll close our program with the four-way test. Michael? Stand and recite with me. Of the things we think, say, or do, first, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? Fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? And fifth, is it fun?